After about age 20, we may have all the insulin-producing beta cells we're ever going to have in our pancreas, and so if we lose them, we may lose them for good. Autopsy studies show that by the time type 2 diabetes is diagnosed, we may have already killed off half of our beta cells. You can do it right in a petri dish. Expose human beta cells to fat, they suck it up, and then start dying off. A chronic increase in blood fat levels is harmful, as shown by the important effects in pancreatic beta cell lipotoxicity. Fat breakdown products can interfere with the function of these cells and ultimately lead to their death. And not just any fat, saturated fat. The predominant fat in olives, nuts, and avocados gives you a tiny bump in death protein 5, but saturated fat really ramps up this contributor to beta cell death. Saturated fats are harmful to beta cells, harmful to the insulin-producing cells in our pancreas, cholesterol too. The uptake of bad cholesterol, LDL, can cause beta cell death as a result of free radical formation. So, diets rich in saturated fats not only cause obesity and insulin resistance, but the increased levels of circulating free fats in the blood, called NEFAs, non-esterified fatty acids, causes beta cell death, and may thus contribute to progressive beta cell loss in type 2 diabetes. And this isn't just based on test tube studies. If you infuse fat into people's bloodstream, you can directly impair pancreatic beta cell function, and the same when we ingest it. Type 2 diabetes is characterized by defects in both insulin secretion and insulin action, and saturated fat appears to impair both. Researchers showed saturated fat ingestion reduces insulin sensitivity within hours. But these were non-diabetics, so their pancreas should have been able to boost insulin secretion to match, but insulin secretion failed to compensate for insulin resistance in subjects who ingested the saturated fat, and this implies the saturated fat impaired beta cell function as well, again just within hours after going into our mouth. So, increased consumption of saturated fats has a powerful short and long-term effect on insulin action, contributing to the dysfunction and death of pancreatic beta cells in diabetes. And saturated fat isn't just toxic to the pancreas. The fats found predominantly in meat and dairy, chicken and cheese are the two main sources in the American diet, are almost universally toxic, whereas the fats found in olives, nuts, and avocados are not. Saturated fat has been found to be particularly toxic to liver cells in the formation of fatty liver disease. You expose human liver cells to plant fat, and nothing happens. Expose liver cells to animal fat, and a third of them die. This may explain why higher intakes of saturated fat and cholesterol are associated with non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. By cutting down on saturated fat consumption, we may be able to help interrupt this process. Decreasing saturated fat intake may help bring down the need for all that excess insulin. So either being fat or eating saturated fat can both cause that excess insulin in the blood. The effect of reducing dietary saturated fat intake on insulin levels is substantial, regardless of how much belly fat we have. And it's not just that by eating fat we may be more likely to store it as fat. Saturated fats, independently of any role they have of making us fat, may contribute to the development of insulin resistance and all its clinical consequences. After controlling for weight and alcohol and smoking and exercise and family history, diabetes incidence was significantly associated with the proportion of saturated fat in our blood. So what causes diabetes? The consumption of too many calories rich in saturated fats. Now, just like everyone who smokes doesn't develop lung cancer, everyone that eats a lot of saturated fat doesn't develop diabetes. There's a genetic component. But just like smoking can be said to cause lung cancer, high-calorie diets rich in saturated fats is currently considered the cause of type 2 diabetes. Type 2 diabetes is becoming a world pandemic. We know the consumption of eggs is related to the development of some other chronic diseases. What about diabetes? Researchers found a stepwise increase in risk the more and more eggs people ate. Eating just a single egg a week appeared to increase the odds of diabetes by 76%. 2 eggs a week appeared to double the odds, and just a single egg a day triple the odds. 3 times greater risk of type 2 diabetes, one of the leading causes of death and amputations, blindness, and kidney failure. This is not the first time a link between eggs and diabetes has been reported. In 2009, Harvard researchers found that a single egg a day or more was associated with an increased risk of type 2 diabetes in men and women, and that finding has since also been confirmed in other populations, Asia in 2011 and Europe in 2012. And the high consumption of eggs associated with diabetes risk was less than 1 a day. Though it appears you have to start early, once you get into your 70s, avoiding eggs may not help. Once we then have diabetes, eggs may hasten our death. Eating 1 egg a day or more appears to shorten anyone's lifespan, but may double the all-cause mortality for those with diabetes. Not good news for the egg industry. From a transcript of a closed meeting I found through the Freedom of Information Act, given the rate at which obesity and incidence of type 2 diabetes is growing in the U.S., any association between dietary cholesterol and type 2 diabetes could be a showstopper that could overshadow the positive attributes of eggs. OK, so we now know how to prevent diabetes. How do we treat it? Well, there's lots of different drugs for diabetics that lower their blood sugars, but often at the expense of increased risk of heart failure, heart attacks, and bone fractures. There has to be a better way. Just like with heart disease, the same diet that prevents the disease in the first place can reverse the disease once you have it. You put 20 diabetics, for example, on even a near-vegetarian diet, and in 16 days, half don't even need to take insulin anymore, and those who do are on half the dose. And that's after only about 2 weeks. A randomized, controlled clinical trial put the official American Diabetes Association diabetic diet versus the vegan diet head-to-head. The ADA diet slowed the progression of the disease, such that their diabetes was just a tiny bit worse at the end of the study period. But on the vegan diet, their diabetes actually got better, significantly better. Just think how many lives eating vegan could save, how many lives, eyes, kidneys, feet, and families.